This is Leading in a New Reality, and I'm Elizabeth Fitzsimons, Vice President of Leadership and Engagement at Leeds San Diego, which is an affiliate of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. At Leeds San Diego, it's our mission to connect, educate, and empower leaders for positive change. We do that through professional and leadership development, board matching, and partnering with local nonprofits on projects that serve the community. This webinar series is produced in partnership with Jones, a company whose mission is to develop leaders and human systems that counter oppression through diversity, inclusion, and organizational effectiveness. This webinar is meant to help you understand what's happening in our rapidly changing world and to inspire you and empower you as leaders of teams and leaders of families. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed by ABC 10 News. Thank you, 10 News. Everyone, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send us questions for our guests, and we'll take questions from our viewers on Facebook as well. My colleague and program manager, Kim Wynn, is here with me and will be looking for your questions and comments. Today's topic is distance learning and reopening and the education gap. We are about 1 month into the new school year, with some schools returning to in-person instruction, but most of our schools continuing with distance learning. Since schools closed in March, it's become very clear just how critical the infrastructure of schools is to our entire economy and society. We need children in school so parents can work. We need parents to work to keep our economy going. It's also become clear how much our children's well-being depends on their connection to their friends, their teachers, and their routines. And the pandemic has made worse an already existing education and opportunity gap, compounding those inequities in our country. We're going to break down things today with our expert guests, and we hope you'll leave today's program with a deeper understanding of what's happening locally with education and also with some ideas for action that you can take. I'm very grateful to our guests for joining us today. Camille Robinson is a public health trained pediatrician specializing in adolescent medicine and addiction medicine, who is committed to improving the health and well-being of vulnerable youth. She serves as an advisor to our partner, Jones. Dr. Robinson is currently the American Academy of Pediatrics California Chapter 3 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Champion for the San Diego area. She has dedicated her career to training the next generation of physicians in racism, health disparities, equity, and trauma-informed care. Welcome, Dr. Robinson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
We're glad you're here. David Miyashiro is superintendent of the Cajon Valley Union School District. Under his leadership, the district has undergone a seamless transition to the digital age. Cajon Valley has achieved system-wide success with blended and personalized learning, where all teachers and students have 24/7 access to their own district-issued laptop, internet connectivity, and a digital ecosystem of robust resources and creativity tools. Dr. Miyashiro believes the role and impact of public educators go far beyond the classroom walls, that in order to keep pace with the rapidly changing world, public education must be in a constant state of evolution. Dr. Miyashiro and team have applied that approach to the reopening of in-person instruction and currently have about 70% of their students in classrooms now. Welcome, Dr. Miyashiro.
Thank you, Liz. Good to meet you finally in person, Dr. Robinson.
Great, thank you. Dr. Miyashiro, let's start with you, please. The Cajon Valley Union School District, which serves about 16,000 children over 60 square miles in San Diego's East County, is now back open for in-person instruction. Can you tell us how you got to this point and how it's going so far?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. And we've been having this conversation with a lot of people. I think for us, we never closed. So on March 13th, basically every school district in San Diego was ordered to shut down, and we were given 3 tasks. One was continue feeding students. So our nutrition programs were to still run. 2, transition to distance learning so that children can still have education. And 3 was, if you can, provide free childcare for essential workers. The third option by the government was an option. It wasn't a mandate. First two are mandates. And so without a system in place, on March 13th, Michelle Hayes, who runs Human Resources and Personnel, we said we need people to be able to prepare meals and distribute meals at distribution centers. We didn't have a plan for that before March 13th because we didn't plan to shut down schools. And so over the weekend, we made a video and said, hey, Cajon Valley, we have these goals. We need to serve our children. We have meals to serve. We need people to go to distribution centers. And by the way, it was raining at this time. I don't remember if you remember, but it was rainy. And so we put out a survey of volunteers, and we had several hundred employees write back, tell me where, tell me when. And so our child nutrition department came, they set up shop, and we set up distribution centers on that following Monday without a labor plan, without anything, just volunteers and people who care about our community. And ever since then, we didn't stop. Our ed services team, because all of our kids already had their own laptops and because our teachers were already savvy with technology, they were able to begin distance learning and work on digital tools beginning that Monday. And we also showed up in person. So even though we were on a shelter in place, we were on a list of essential workforce, meaning that our work is to be done at the school sites, in the kitchen, with our families, providing in-person service, whether that's food or care or education. And so we never stopped. And I think that gave us an advantage moving into the spring, moving into our free summer program and free childcare program for essential workers. And so our schools have been open since the community shut down.
Dr. Miyashiro, when did you start putting together a plan for reopening? It must have been over the summer.
Actually, no. We started our free childcare for essential worker program. Mm-hmm. And what that gave us the ability to do was to take all these guidelines that were put together by non-educators in terms of 6 feet apart and put floor markings here, and you should have hand sanitizer available, and face covering should be this. All these different guidelines, they were all in theory. We've never run school that way. But in order to run the childcare program, we had to put those things into place. So our print shop and our logistics team, our warehouse, they went to town getting all the PPE, setting up the campuses for ingress and egress, all the things that schools are trying to do now. We started in March and April. Mm-hmm. And so we learned from that example. Our principals came out and watched students coming on campus, leaving campus, getting their temperature checked. And this is back in April. And so they were able to take that experience and build their own site plans so that we can invite children back to school. What we also did was every week, starting that first week of March, I started meeting with every PTA president from every school, along with our principals and a couple school board members, hearing from them. How are things? What's going on? How's distance learning going? How are your kids doing? What can we do for you? And what we're hearing from our parents and our staff is we need access to our schools. We need access to our real curriculum. And that really compelled our action steps. So we thank our staff, our community, especially our school board for helping us move forward.
So we're a few weeks in now. How is it going?
It's less than ideal, but our kids are back and they're happy. Today I was at Bostonia Elementary School and it's Superhero Day. And so the kids are running around with their superhero costumes, and it almost looked normal because the masks didn't stand out so much of that. But apart from that, there's laughter and happiness and joy. Our teachers, they're doing amazing work, and our families that chose to stay home are getting amazing distance learning too. So as I walk by classrooms, there's 2 in-person classrooms, but then the next classroom, there's a teacher on a screen engaging her students whose parents have opted to keep their kids home because they're not quite comfortable to send them back to school yet. But that was our goal. The way that we talk about our children are our treasures, but our parents are our clients. And so we wanted to provide our clients, our parents, a choice to stay home, a choice to come to school, just like other families are choosing options for their kids.
Thank you. We're going to poll the parents who are in attendance to see how their children are learning right now and what their concerns are. So you're going to see a poll pop up on your screen, everyone. If you could fill that out, I'm going to do it too, because I am a parent of 3. Okay. So we're asking if your children are distance learning, back in person, or hybrid, and how do you feel your children are doing in that situation? As we're collecting responses, I'd like to talk about the education gap. And first, if we could understand what that means in the best of times from an educator. Dr. Miyashiro, can you explain what we're talking about with the education gap?
Our assistant superintendent, Karen Minshew, said it best, because on, I think, our third or fourth call with our PTA presidents, we had weekly Zooms. They started to hear the language from the media about learning loss. They said, what's going to happen? My child's losing. And then Karen said, actually, every child in the country right now is in the same boat. So your kid is actually moving forward beyond them because of the digital tools and what we're able to start right away. But I think it has exacerbated the gap between a lot of things, technology and the digital divide, in terms of kids that have access to ubiquitous and free Wi-Fi and devices to engage in their education, and those who don't. Those who have equitable access to food and those who don't. And then those who have options for childcare and extended learning days and enrichment, and those who don't. And we've seen this as an opportunity to close that. We believe the public school system should provide all that for every child, both low income and our affluent families. The pandemic has touched everybody, not just our low income students.
Dr. Robinson, what are you seeing when it comes to those economic inequities that Dr. Miyashiro was just talking about? How is that playing out in the kids that come to you?
Yeah, so I think what I've been seeing is I have a large demographics of socioeconomic status patients. So I've got very affluent patients, and I've got those that are a little bit on the more low income spectrum. And I think what I've been told by a lot of my patients and a lot of the parents are, my affluent parents are able to kind of get into these little pods, and they're able to afford tutoring, like outside tutoring, and some of the digital equipment that we were talking about earlier. And whereas some of my low income patients are telling me that they don't have access to that, or they're just struggling with Wi-Fi at home, or all 4 children are on Wi-Fi at home doing the same learning, and they're having connection troubles. And so that's really what I've been hearing from a lot of my patients. And then we've also seen that COVID has just also highlighted the racial inequities that we have for access to healthcare. So I think that has compounded and brought to the forefront a lot of my patients, and they've been concerned about, what kind of access will we have during this pandemic, and how our office is safe, and how our healthcare provider is going to continue providing care, whether it be telehealth or in-person visits. And so I think that I'm seeing a variety of responses from all of my patients and parents trying to navigate this very, very complicated situation. And I think education has been one thing that my parents and my patients bring up almost every single visit, of like how to actually make this work.
And what do you tell them, Dr. Robinson?
So, we try to troubleshoot of where they're at. I think that it all depends on the setup at the house. And so we, in adolescent medicine, we go into a pretty extensive psychosocial history. And so we gather a lot of information on the composition of the house, of who's living there, and where they are in their education, and if they have like an IEP or a 504 plan, and just honestly advocating for them and asking them, have you talked to the school about accommodations that you had previously? And so we've really tried to delve into what people may consider maybe not the pediatrician's realm, but we're trying to get into the homes of our kids to understand how we can help them in even the education realm. Because there's been extensive research showing that education is tightly linked to health, even when you look at a child's health and then fast forward it to adult health. So we as pediatricians really care about education because we know that it sets up a lifelong pattern for health.
Are you talking about health as they grow into adults, or health right now?
Health right now, but also health as they grow into adulthood. So the health and the education that they have now impacts them in the future. It gives them more opportunities to live in neighborhoods that have more access. It also gives them health knowledge and health literacy. So all of this has sort of been shown in large studies. And so we do care as pediatricians that that schools are able to adequately respond to our students' needs.
Great, thank you, Dr. Robinson. Kim, if you have the results to that poll, if you could put them up. So most are distance learning, as we guessed, and everyone's kind of split about how the kids are keeping up or falling behind or unsure. It's kind of almost equal there. But most are distance learning, very few are in person, and then a little bit more than the in-person are hybrid. That keeping up, falling behind, not sure, it's really the range, right? Everybody is dealing with something different. And I guess it really depends on, as you were saying, Dr. Robinson, that family situation, what you have going on at home, the support system that you have, right? What you have access to. So Dr. Robinson, your specialty is adolescents. So let's talk middle schoolers, high schoolers right now. What have you noticed in this age group over the last 6 months? I personally have 3 kids. One of them is a high schooler. 2 of them are twins in 2nd grade. And I'll tell you, the issues are so different. So tell me what you have been observing in your adolescent patients.
Absolutely. So I would say the number one change I've seen is sleep changes and disruption to sleep patterns. So unfortunately, a lot of our students did kind of get dropped out of school, in March when the pandemic began. And so a lot of times what happened was they were trying to struggle with digital learning, but really couldn't get into it. And then we had summer, and a lot of them had flipped their schedule where they're like staying up till 12 o'clock or 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. sometimes, and then not getting up until the afternoon. And so now that we're back in fall and we're preparing to go back to school and we're in school, everyone is really talking about the challenge of flipping their sleep schedule back to a normal sleep schedule. And so a lot of my adolescents are coming in asking, what can I do about my sleep? I'm not sleeping, I'm unable to sleep. Or I'm like sleeping through class, or I'm sleeping during class. So I log on and I'm just in the bed and I'm not propped up. And so that's kind of the common complaints I'm getting. But I think one of the more concerning complaints I'm getting is really the level of depression, anxiety, and suicidality that I'm hearing from my patients. I think that, and also parents are also noticing eating disorders more as well. So I think a lot in the mental health realm has come to light because our kids are spending more time at home, and parents are starting to realize that mood is changing, anxiety levels are changing, eating behaviors are not normal. And so I'm really seeing a lot of kids, they're not able to socialize with their peers, and they're having hard times connecting with others. And so that depression, anxiety is coming to the surface. And I think a lot of my patients are also having trouble. How do I learn in this environment, in this digital world? And am I going to fall behind? Or what do I look like on screen? And so a lot of that is, these are common adolescent concerns, and they have to be validated. And I think that unfortunately that this has been a huge wave that I'm treating a lot of mental health. We're getting a lot of people into therapy, which is great, because I want to decrease the stigma around that. And we're getting people the help they need. But, it really has become a huge problem.
And Dr. Robinson, and I'm going to ask Dr. Miyashiro about this as well, what about the mental health of the parents who have been tasked with this enormous burden of taking on this new role of teacher on top of their full-time jobs? So Dr. Robinson, what are you seeing in the parents, and what is your role there?
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of parents exhausted. And that goes for the young ones in middle school, but also the young adults. So because a lot of colleges are now digital across the country, this is the first time that a whole generation of young adults are living back again with their parents, right, when they thought that they were going to be out and living life and independent. And for the parents, they're trying to figure out how to balance that independence, but also, I've got a young adult living with me. And then for my parents with middle schoolers, they're overwhelmed because they're trying to go back to work. They're trying to also monitor and make sure that they go to school or they're paying attention in school. And so a lot of times I also advocate for my parents to seek therapy resources for themselves as well, because I think that if, as a parent, sometimes we're the last to take care of ourselves. And so sometimes we have to take care of ourselves to help our kids make sure that their mental health is just as good.
Thank you. Dr. Miyashiro, what have you been observing in terms of mental health for the students and their caregivers?
Yeah, I started meeting with parents as a group once a week, but every time a parent would write to me or call our office, we'd set up an appointment, and I'd spend at least 15 to 20 on a Zoom or a distance walk, and thousands of parent meetings. Dr. Robinson summed it up in her last statement in terms of all the things that were shared. But what I was hearing was basically that distance learning and schools closed don't work for most people.
Right.
There are some kids that actually thrived and excelled during this time. Some parents came and said, you know, my child's an introvert, and actually they don't have to be in a peer situation, and they've been thriving in this. But that's not the percentage or the majority of our students. And parents did come in and they did share their personal stories. Even in our affluent community, one of the parent stories that I heard over and over again was, I have the ability to work from home, and I have a place for my child to work, but I have to also attend to 15 employees that I have to remotely manage. And I have a boss to please, and I have a deadline. And when I'm trying to focus on this, and I can't focus on that, now I feel like a bad mother and a bad employee, and I'm not keeping up with my household things. And then they start to tear up, and then you just see the angst and the trauma and stress that this whole thing is putting on everybody. And hearing that over and over again, thousands of times, and different kinds of stories. Parents that are deciding, you know what, we both have to work. You know, our 11-year-old, she's going to be watching our 5-year-old by themselves in their apartment. And our teachers and our school staff are hearing this too, because they're reaching out and say, how come you didn't come pick up lunch today? Oh, my parents aren't home, and I'm not supposed to leave the house. And these heartbreaking stories from high income, from low income, really helped us understand the custodial role the school district or school system plays in society as it relates to the economy, and also that secondary place where parents can rely on for safety and nurturing of their children. And that's something that we early on said we have to provide, and that's why we never closed. And during summer, when we opened up at scale at all 27 schools, we said, hey parents, if your children want to come out for some sports, some art, some enrichment, and some learning, we'd love to have them on campus. And that first week, when parents dropped off their kids, you could just see the joy in their face, like this school, this place, and they saw their teachers and they would wave at them, and the joy that came back to them. And then I spoke to several parents who said, I picked my child up from enrichment and I saw them for the first time in 6 months. They told me about their day. They said, I saw so-and-so and so-and-so, and then I did this, and then they lit up and they saw their child in a light that they hadn't seen in a long time. And for a lot of us, you know, I don't think we've noticed that you know, the decline in our children's well-being and their emotional health is because it's been so prolonged over time. But for those kids who have come back and had the interaction with their peers and the adults who care about them as well, it just makes it so evident that every child needs to have access to their school, to their friends, and to the other adults who care about them.
Yeah, that is so true. My 2 boys were in first grade last spring when the schools shut down. And so, you know, my husband and I both have jobs where we can work from home. And so we all went to the kitchen table and we said, okay, we're going to do this. And, you know, we're very fortunate to be in that situation, but boy, it really did not work. And I could really see the toll that it was taking on my 2 little ones. The high schooler, she did okay. She's very self-directed and she could manage and she'd see her friends on Zoom. But the 2 little guys, one of them actually said to me, you know, Mama, I thought I was going to have a happy life. Oh. You know, and it just, oh, geez, okay, well, gee, we need to fix something here. But that loss of the structure, the loss of the teacher, who is really, after the parents, the most important person in their lives, was really hard for them. So, you know, this fall, we got together with a few other families in our neighborhood and we created a learning pod. And that got them some structure. It got them some interaction with friends. And it's like you said, Dr. Miyashiro, like my boys are back. They're their old selves again. But, you know, not every family has that ability to do that. So what can families who are doing, what can families who have their kids in a pod do to help address this growing gap? Like, what can we do to make sure this doesn't keep growing, to actually get the kids who need that help some help? And I'll start with you, Dr. Miyashiro.
Okay, well, I think that the more that we can advocate for the whole system to reopen, the better. I received an email from UTC Ice, the ice rink. I play ice hockey, not professionally, but they sent us an email and said, hey, if you have children that go to the San Diego Unified School District, we're going to follow their curriculum, and we've trained our ice coaches on distance learning. And so you can drop off your child, have a session on the ice in the morning. We'll do their distance learning. We'll have a meal, have another session on ice. We'll do any more distance learning so that when you pick your child up, they're done with school. You don't have homework. I thought, wow, that's amazing for $1,000 a month. And so for parents that can afford and are choosing that, no one's going to begrudge anybody for doing the best for their kid. That's what we all are trying to do. But for the 70% of my families in Cajon Valley, they don't even know that's an option. Mm-hmm. And they don't have the means probably to pay for an additional $1,000 a month for distance learning support. So in our district, we've said we have to be the voice of the 70%. Mm-hmm. We have to advocate for them. So we spent $1.2 million in a program called Sports for Learning to create pods and create recreation and create opportunities for all kids so that we can invite them all back to campus, so that they all can have distance learning support, and so that all parents can pick their children up from school and say, how was your day? And the kid said, it was great. And said, do you have any homework? No. And mom could say, yes, we can go home and just have dinner and have some family time. And we're not there yet, but that's our goal. And our board is committed to using our stimulus money to make sure that every family, especially the 70% that don't tend to advocate for themselves, have the very best for their children.
Dr. Robinson, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think it's like this complicated, puzzle that we're all trying to put together. Mm-hmm. And I think that my goal as a pediatrician is always to put the kiddo at the center. So whether that be health or education, and I see them as two things that are totally linked together. And so I hear from my parents and my patients, some of them feel very comfortable going back and some of them don't. And we troubleshoot that in the office and we talk about, pros and cons of each. And I really just encourage, really encourage us to think about what is best for each of our families and to consider our kiddos and their mental health and their well-being going forward, for sure.
Thank you. We're going to take another poll, and this one is for everyone, parents and anyone else who has concerns about this issue. And we're asking, what's your greatest concern right now? Is it childcare? Is it trying to balance work and distance learning? Is it your children's health or, children's in general health and emotional well-being? So please take that poll so we can kind of gauge where everyone's at. We touched on this earlier, Dr. Robinson, about what you're seeing and with kids, the health effects, the impacts. Long term, can you kind of give us your prediction on what are the long-term effects of this experience on children who are going through this right now?
Absolutely. I think that one of my biggest concerns for long-term is honestly the mental health and well-being and socialization for these kiddos. I think that we are obviously seeing a huge generation of young adults that are now living back with their parents for a good chunk of the time. Mm-hmm. And that's even delaying their own careers or independent living. And I worry about that generation trying to get back out in the world after, not being with their friends or not being in college and not experiencing that independent living. And so I worry about those, but I also worry about the little ones that I don't take care of, which is the very, very little ones, because socialization is such an important piece to development with those early years. And then those, middle school years, they're tough, but they're very tough.
Without all of this going on, it's a nightmare, right?
Right, exactly. But I think that still, the education piece, but also the socialization piece and the mental health piece is also very important for us to consider. And so I just want us to keep this, this whole entire generation of kids in mind when we think about what we do as adults that affect them.
As parents and caregivers of these kids, Dr. Robinson, what should we be paying attention to? What should we be looking for?
Absolutely. I would say definitely paying attention to sleep cycles and trying to get like a structure or routine going. I think that has been my number one advice to parents. And parents have really done really well once they get that advice that, oh, I need to actually institute structure. It's okay for me to have that power. Mm-hmm. And I say, yes, I'm giving you that power to put that structure or change some sleep cycles, turn the electronics off at night so you can get back to sleep. But I also encourage parents to also look for irritability in their teenagers. So sometimes depression actually presents as irritability and not sort of that depressed, sad mood. And so sometimes when teenagers are more irritable in this time, we actually may be missing depression. And so I encourage my parents to see if there's new irritability that seems not like your child, to consider just making an appointment with your pediatrician or your healthcare specialist, just to make sure that mood issues are not something that are going unnoticed. And we should also pay attention, like I've said before, to our own mental health as parents.
Kind of comment on that?
Yes,
please.
When you were saying that, Dr. Robinson, this summer we tried to get away for just a weekend with our daughter, my wife and our daughter. She's 8, and she was having a fit at the table, which she normally doesn't do. And I started to get on her, and she had this look on her face where she was ready to cry and ready to get angry. And my wife kicked me on the table. She said, "We need to talk about this later. Let it go." And she said doesn't have the words to tell us that she's missing her friends, that she's missing the socialization. She doesn't know how to say it, but that's what's happening. And oh gosh, like how do you fix that? And I felt bad as a parent for going to, don't do that, as opposed to listening. So thank you for that advice. I wish I had it 6 weeks ago, but better now.
It's okay. It's a very common misconception because no one knows. You think of depression as just being very sad and crying and withdrawn, but our teenagers actually present differently than we would do as adults. Mm-hmm. So it's just important for us to remember that irritability could be actually depression and not sort of being, your normal sassy teenager.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to tell the difference, right? I mean, yeah, and it's just such a different time. And of course you go to your, what you know of your child's behavior. And before the pandemic, that was just, it was completely different. So watching for those things, but also can we as parents to try, I know that we're so limited because they can't see their friends like they used to. They can't, participate in sports as they used to. So what can we create for them to almost fill that gap? I mean, what is available to us as parents and caregivers to almost kind of like, I don't know, create some kind of gap until we can get back to what we considered normal?
Yeah, so it's a tough question because it also obviously depends on where you live or what you have access to. But I found one of the most common things is my parents are like, should I just let them even walk around the house or like walk around the neighborhood? So many families were not even leaving their physical house. And right. So even just getting some fresh air and going on a walk and even doing like tandem walks. So a friend in the neighborhood goes on the other side of the sidewalk and just walking that way, because just getting outside it gives you vitamin D. It does uplift the spirit and the mood. And so that is one of the easier things if you have, access to a safe neighborhood and you're able to get out in your neighborhood.
Dr. Miyashiro, any tips for the folks who are still at home and the ones who are going back to school but are having a hard time adjusting?
Well, I appreciate the forum, but I think having conversations with those that are in the power of decision making. So me and our school board members, our principals and teachers, talk to them. Again, the children are our treasures, but you parents are our clients. We're here to serve you in partnership. And so if we don't know what you're experiencing and what your needs are, we can't design for that. And our design right now in Cajon Valley is based almost 100% on parent and teacher input in terms of what we need to teach in a safe environment, and parents, what we need to feel comfortable to send our children in a safe environment. And so talking and being active and advocating is what I think is the only thing that we can do until we have what we want.
Dr. Miyashiro, where would you advise someone start who doesn't have any experience talking to their school district? I mean, you know, this is not something that they would normally do. Where do you start?
And this group, the audience here, I would probably assume that are highly informed, highly engaged, highly educated, and understand the system. But for all those parents, we bend over backwards to be accessible. And I talk to parents that are not even in my district who call or write or ask questions. And if everybody did that and said, just listen for a little bit and say, you know what, I know someone can help, or you know what, you should talk to your school board. School board will listen. The elected officials will listen to what the parents and community have to say. And they will direct that to the superintendent, who will listen, or will probably be looking for another job in another several months. We take parent input very seriously. They're our clients, and we want to hear from them.
Dr. Miyashiro, how are the teachers doing? Let's talk about how they're faring through all of this.
The teachers are doing great. I wouldn't say that it was easy or that it's even easy now. There are several teachers that were afraid to come back. Yeah. And so what we had to do was make sure that as much as possible, just like we provided choice to parents in terms of sending their kids back to school, creating choice for teachers in terms of, you know, if you have an underlying condition, there's an opportunity for you, or if you don't feel comfortable yet, you know, let's see where you're at. For us, we're very fortunate that, so 70% of our students wanted to come back in person, or parents wanted to send them back in person. We had more than 70% of teachers elect to teach in person. So we actually had to have some teachers volunteer to do the distance learning who would rather be at school with kids. And so by surveying staff and understanding that not everyone is going to get their first choice, we're able to find a system that works. But there still are staff that, you know, in the early stages are not completely comfortable, but are showing up to do this work anyways. And our job is to lean into that and to observe that and to make sure we're focusing on the well-being of our teachers and staff as well. But once they're out in the classrooms and once they're out doing things, I've noticed that they become much more comfortable as we have the procedures. One teacher, a kindergarten teacher at one of our schools, I went on the first week on Thursday. So she had been there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with her kindergartners. I said, Emery, how was your first week? And she's, oh my God, I went home on Monday and I took off my clothes in the backyard and I threw them in the thing, and you know, I washed them immediately, and then I scrubbed myself 3 times, and then Tuesday I didn't do that, and then Wednesday I'm a little bit better, and then today we're good. And so for people that have been sheltering in place for months and then this is their first experience, that's a really hard shift. That's why we did our spring and summer, so that teachers could start to experience things and get comfortable before they actually had to start the school year. Psychologically, going from A to B without a middle ground is hard. But if we do it in stages and help people get accustomed to the procedures, feel more safe, then it can be done a lot better. Yeah.
Dr. Robinson, do you have any teachers in the families in your care?
I actually don't. I don't have any. I have mostly just parents that are working and trying to get their kids into school.
Got it. Yeah, it's been interesting to watch our kids teacher who has a child at home who is distance learning navigate that, and I'm just in awe. I'm in complete awe of how she's doing that, and her little one is little too, and I think in kinder, so it's pretty amazing. On the other end of the age spectrum are the college kids. And so I wanted to talk with you, Dr. Robinson, about the spike of COVID infections at SDSU when kids returned to campus this fall. And there was a lot of news coverage and a lot of frustration being aired about kids, you know, why they weren't being more careful. But what can you tell us about this age group and sort of where their brain is at right now?
Absolutely. So I wasn't surprised by any of the reports, going across the country about young adults in college not sort of sticking to the social distancing guidelines that have been suggested, because brain development is still ongoing. So the brain doesn't fully mature or develop until someone's at least 25 years of age, and some studies even show like till 30. And so if you can imagine what matures faster is actually the pleasure or reward center. So that comes online first. And so if you can imagine, if you're a college student out of the home for the first time, your reward center is just going off like crazy and telling you go, go, go. And the front part of the brain is the last to mature, which is the part where our decision-making capabilities come into play. So if you can think about it, we've got go, 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 and nothing to say slow down and stop. And
Okay.
so it is very, very natural for our young adults in this age group to, push boundaries, to engage in risk-taking behaviors, and to congregate together, because that is what developmentally the brain has been told to do. So I'm not surprised. It's hard, obviously, to corral a large group that wants to engage with each other and socialize and work on their identity development. So I'm not surprised by what has happened across the country. It's very unfortunately developmentally appropriate, but obviously
Right.
it's difficult with the pandemic to figure out how to make this safe for everyone.
Dr. Miyashiro, are you having challenges with your high school juniors and seniors?
Actually, the reason that we started with a hybrid model was based on teachers' feedback from summer.
Mm.
We had originally planned to go back to our original plan from the spring, which gave parents option of full-time school in addition to distance learning. And when we had our input session from the summer teachers and also our meeting with our Teachers Association, they said that after the second week of school, the middle school students started to get a little bit lax about the procedures and the rules about wearing face coverings. By week 3, kids, after they would pass the line, would grab onto each other and say, how you're doing, and put their face in each other's face, and be middle school kids.
Right.
And so they said, unless we can assure ourselves that the kids are following the procedures, we're not ready to come back fully. And so we leaned into that and said, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. Let's make sure that the kids are able to demonstrate that they can follow the procedures. The parents support our decisions with what we decide about face coverings and distance. And then as we can demonstrate safety, we will scale up. And so, yes, I think the older the kids get, the more embracing they are. And we were all there ourselves. I remember
Right.
I probably would have been one of those kids too. So
Absolutely.
We've got a couple questions. One of them is from Facebook, and it actually has to do with masks, what you're just talking about, Dr. Miyashiro. But this one is about concern about special ed students if they're not able to keep their masks on throughout the day due to sensory issues or health reasons. Then what will protect the staff going back if masks are to protect others, not yourself? Do you have thoughts on that, and what kind of policies do you have in place or practices do you have in place?
Yeah, those are things that we addressed in our memorandum of understanding in terms of giving the teachers the PPE that they want, including N95 and face coverings and shields and even outerwear gear. And so I was visiting a moderate severe class last week, and moderate severe, that's our special needs students that have the most significant disabilities. So a lot of these kids are nonverbal, need assistance in moving around, diapering, and also, sensory issues where they wouldn't be able to keep on the mask. So the teacher and the teacher's aides were in there, and they had varying degrees of covering based on what their choice was. But the kids didn't have anything in terms of masks on. And one of the kids, and this is the way of communicating sometimes, saw me and I smiled at him through my mask, and then he started walking up and gave me a big hug. And then the teacher looked at me and said, is that okay? And I said, I think so, we're learning. But I'm not gonna not give a kid a hug who wants a hug in a class. And then they went back to work. But I think that we just have to adjust and make the best decision we have with the information that we have. And help me, Dr. Robinson, if I'm wrong. I would love your advice on this because I'm not a health expert, and the guidelines from the state have a lot of gray area in terms of what you should do, because almost every guideline about like you should wear face masks as much as possible. Kids that are, grades 2 and under should be 6 feet apart as much as possible. Well, that's a lot of gray. So what are the hard and fast rules, and where should we draw the line?
Yeah, I think that unfortunately there are no hard and fast rules because I think every school district and even every school is going to be very different. And I think that's where the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a pretty extensive sort of recommendations for schools openings, was also very left open to interpretation because every school district and every school is going to be different. I will say that I've talked to a lot of pediatricians and providers across the country that are my colleagues. And the same thing happens with, if we have a kid with autism come in who can't wear a face mask, we wear face shields and protective masks as well for ourselves. So trying to, as much as possible, understand, people's limitations and abilities to wear masks for the kids who have sensory problems or just can't tolerate it. We make sure that we also protect ourselves in that moment. So we've been doing something very similar to what you are describing, and lots of providers have been doing the same.
What about children who they can't understand what you're doing or what you're saying or what your emotions are because you're wearing a mask? Is that really difficult for healthcare providers and teachers as well, because they can't see that you're smiling and that you're friendly and warm? And how do you get past that?
Absolutely. I think that's been one of the challenges in building rapport with patients that are new to our clinic or are having mental health issues, and trying to build that rapport. It's really difficult with the mask on because you can try to smile with your eyes, but that doesn't always work, obviously.
Right.
And so sometimes I find myself talking a lot more about what emotions I'm experiencing. So I'm almost like narrating what I'm doing to make the point across, instead of a lot of the nonverbal cues that I would normally be doing in an office visit. I feel myself going more towards verbal cues than nonverbal cues.
Our pediatrician had this brilliant idea. She has a picture of herself smiling, like on her face shield, because you can only see her eyes, but then you can see how she normally looks. And she's got like big heart around it, Dr. H right there, so that's really nice. Dr. Miyashiro, are any of your teachers having trouble connecting because of masks?
No, and this has been a really challenging issue because in a district with 27 schools, there are different opinions in different parent groups and even amongst the teachers. So this first several weeks has been a lot of, okay, the rules say this, but this person's interpreting this way and this interprets. And so we're finding challenge, and we're going to meet with our collective labor groups to talk about that. What we'd really like to do is give our teachers some discretion in their classrooms to say, okay, boys and girls, you're all behind your plexiglass. You're all sitting down reading. If you'd like to take off your mask while you're doing silent reading, I'd like to say that's okay. That's not currently in our agreement, but those are things we need to talk about and work out. Or outside at play, there's varying degrees of interpretation of should kids be wearing their face coverings at recess. Well, in East County today, it's 100 degrees. And right now, the rules are very conservative and the most restrictive. And we started there, and I think that was the right start. But I think that there's going to be a little bit of negotiation and discretion, and give the power of the discretion to our professionals that are actually with the kids. That's my hope. That's what I'd like to see.
Got it. We're going to get the results of that last poll. Kim is going to put them up. Wow, children's health and emotional well-being is the top concern for everyone here today, followed by balancing work and distance learning, and then childcare. So it's really that children's health and emotional well-being. It's really everybody's experiencing that. We have a question from Jasmine. She said she wanted to make sure she heard Dr. Robinson correctly earlier when Dr. Robinson mentioned a lack of education impacting health and their relation to where they may end up in neighborhoods, and was asking if you could kind of expand on that and talk about that a little bit more. What does that mean and how does that play out?
Sure, sorry. So I hope I'm clear this time. So there's been a lot of research into looking at what level of education you have and what does that mean for your long-term life, but also your long-term physical and mental health as an adult. So basically the two are really linked together, especially in the United States. So your level of education can be directly correlated to how you may have access to neighborhoods or income opportunities or job opportunities, or physical access to healthcare systems or places. And that has been shown that unfortunately in America, our level of education is correlated with how far we are able to go. And even if you look at maps, so a lot of cities have had maps where they do like county by county or zip code by zip code of the highest level or the average level of education in that sort of area. And they look at life expectancy rates, and you can see disproportionate differences if you're in a community that has a lower average education level. Unfortunately, what has been shown in our cities is that has been associated with lower life expectancy. And that goes a lot into the built environment and the physical environment and the social environment. So it's not just about education, but it really is about our neighborhoods and our areas that we live in. So I'm hoping I'm being clear, but there is definitely a link between the level of education and our future health. And that's why I advocate so much in the office as a pediatrician to determine the health needs of my kids through education.
Thank you for expanding on that, Dr. Robinson. So this group, our lead family and community here, they are very action oriented. And so every time we have a webinar, we like to give them some action to take when they leave this webinar. And so I'd like to ask you both, what is one thing that you would have us do when we leave today? And I'll start with you, Dr. Robinson.
Sure. I would ask that we all ask our loved ones how we're really doing. And not be, how are you doing? And you want to get the good response back so that we don't have to be in that uncomfortable position of trying to respond, but actually asking your loved one how they're doing, and waiting for a response and listening to that response. And maybe even saying it's okay to not be okay. That you can get a truthful response of how that person's mental health and well-being is. And if you need a resource, if they're struggling with their mental health, I like to go to psychologytoday.com. And you can actually find some therapists on that website if you are struggling with mental health issues. And so I would just say, take some time out, ask somebody you love how they're really, really doing, listen, and then come up with a plan if you guys need a little extra support or help.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Dr. Miyashiro, what would you have us do?
She took mine, so I'm going to go a different direction. Two-part. First one, put pressure on the governor to reopen the economy and schools. He shut all the schools down by executive order and then said, okay, open if you want to now. And that's where the inequity is. Some school districts, based on their boards and leadership, have reopened and some have not. He shut us all down at the same time. For equity, he should open us up at the same time. What's happening in California in terms of education crisis is a direct result of the action and inaction of the governor and state superintendent. Two, talk to your superintendent and school board members. When I first got to Cajon Valley almost 8 years ago, our board wanted us to get out into the community. So my first meeting was with the city manager. And I asked the city manager, I said, Doug, you oversee the police department, the fire department, it's public works and development. If the school district was yours, what would you do with it? And he said, well, I'd stop stigmatizing the most important work in the country, I would stop this college for all mentality, and I would teach kids some interpersonal skills, because the kids graduating out of the schools, they don't know how to look a person in the eye, shake them with a good handshake, and have a conversation. And then I met with leaders in the Department of Defense, Navy, and Marines, and they said the same thing. Said, you guys are stigmatizing the most important work in our community in the Department of Defense. So we don't want your leftovers. We want your kids to see us as a first best choice, out of high school or college. And then our Chamber of Commerce here in East County, you're not preparing kids to work in manufacturing, in labor, in development, in construction. Why is it so bad that a kid might, swing a hammer or build a house? Where's the shame in that? And each person over and over again have said, education, K-12, not just in El Cajon, but in the United States, is not preparing kids for life or career. And so we've taken all that input as a local board and said, you know what, our vision now is happy kids engaged in healthy relationships on a path to gainful employment. And those are the goals. We used to have this mission statement on the board dice that nobody could articulate. Happy kids, healthy relationships, gainfully employed. And happiness meaning I have self-esteem, I know my strengths and interests and values, and I love who I am. Healthy relationships, I know my peers and my peers know me well. We know each other's story or each other's background, and that really helps create an anti-bias movement. And then gainful employment. We have a curriculum called the World of Work that starts in kindergarten, where our kids explore the variety of world of work opportunities every year. And we have conversations with their parents about, hey, you know what? Your child really gravitated to the engineering department in this unit. Have you talked about your child about math and science and how they apply that? And parents are like, that's interesting. As opposed to, your child needs to work on this in reading and this in math. It's, here's where your child really is interested. Are you seeing the same thing? And those things came from conversations with the chamber, with our city government, and people like the folks on this group in Leeds, San Diego, who are the difference makers and movers and shakers in business and industry. If you work with your local school districts to have them reposition the system to meet the needs of our economy locally, then we're going to have a lot better outcomes.
Thank you for that. Thank you to our guests, Dr. Camille Robinson and Dr. David Miyashiro, for being with us today. You were both wonderful, and I am grateful for your time and expertise. You also set us up very well for our next webinar, which is going to be about mental health. And that's on October 21st at 2 p.m. We're going to be talking about the mental health of our teams, our families, and ourselves. How do we cope? How do we help the people who depend on us? And also, here's something to make you feel good, some good news. I want to invite you all to Leeds Visionary Awards. This is our annual event, our annual celebration of the leaders and all the things that are working and doing right and going right in our community. So it's a really nice event, and I hope you can join us. It's 1 p.m. on October 28th. It'll be virtual. You can see the 5 inspiring leaders that we're going to be celebrating who have done so much to move our region forward. And you can register on our website, and we'll also include a link in our follow-up email today. So thank you again to our panelists, and thank you all for joining us. And on behalf of Leeds San Diego, I wish you all well. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.